Now to turn to our speaker of the day, Dr. A.M. or Abdu'l-Missagh Ghadirian. He's a professor emeritus at McGill University in the Faculty of Medicine, a distinguished life fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. He's been an author, an educator, and a researcher. He's published quite extensively on psychosocial and spiritual topics, spoken at many universities and public events around the world. And of course, I've also mentioned he was a continental counselor for many years. Several important books that he's published in the last decade or so: Creative Dimensions of Suffering, 2009, Steadfast in the Covenant, Responding to Tests and Tribulations, in 2014, and then Materialism, Moral and Spiritual Consequences, second edition, in 2017. And I've asked Dr. Ghadirian to please at some point hold up a copy of that book so you can see it. It's now also available in Spanish. Today's talk is actually a summary and overview of some of the highlights of that particular book. His current interest is an exploration of interrelationship between religion and science in the advancement of civilization. So having finished our introductions here, I will now stop sharing my screen and turn off my camera and microphone so we can just see Dr. Ghadirian. He doesn't have a PowerPoint for us. And you have a way on your control panel over on the left side. There is a button farther down. I don't know if you hover over it, you'll see anything here, but there is a way for you to make him full screen so you can see his face more fully. If you have a small version of his picture, play around and you can make it bigger. So, Dr. Ghadirian, thank you again. Welcome to this web talk, and I'm now turning it all over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stockman, for inviting me for this presentation. At the beginning of this presentation, I would like to share with viewers a statement which really sums up the challenges and crises of the world at present time. And that is this: humanity is battered by the forces of oppression, whether generated from the depth of religious prejudice or the pinnacle of rampant materialism. This is from the Universal House of Justice. Now, I would like to make a brief introduction about the talk that I am going to give. First of all, this is the issue of materialism, which is viewed from the point of view of psychology, sociology, and also spirituality. I will not discuss the philosophical or dialectic and historical dimensions of materialism. Also, for your information, I should say that this talk is not intended to be against materialists or capitalists or those who are wealthy and affluent people. It is really a debate about the concept of materialism, how we present the Baha'i point of view about that concept and their viewpoints. To define materialism, materialism is a lifestyle which is based on desire for more and acquisition and possession more and more. It is a type of continuum, a process of behavior which it can go from very slow, very low to very high intensity of materialistic concept of concept and the behavior toward it. And therefore, it is difficult to say that somebody is materialist, somebody is not. And in fact, this dichotomy is not good to serve, because this continuum can involve in the lower level of materialistic behavior literally everybody. Another thing is that in materialistic philosophy, this issue of acquisition and possession of wealth is strongly part of their concept, and but it is a learning process. It is called developmental learning process, and it is not a genetic disease. It is something that, as a lifestyle, people choose and follow that. However, in some families, you may know that parents and children may be affected by this notion of materialism and their way of life. Obviously, children learn in the family how to learn about the materialistic behavior and concentrate on that, and what is the issue of desire more and more, and also accumulating more and more. Now, materialistic philosophy is opposed to the spiritual values. It elevates, on the other hand, the acquisition and possession of goods and objects. In effect, it elevates it so high as though they are really valuing a religion. So their value on materialism is very strong, and they believe that in the world there is no physical, no material reality except the matter itself. In other words, matter is the center of all aspects of life. Accordingly, matter has priority over mind, over spirit, and in fact, materialists don't believe in spirit, and whatever is not tangible, is not physical, is not material. For example, consciousness, spirit, soul, spirituality, and also other kind of issues. They consider this as byproduct of matter, as matter is the only existing reality according to the materialistic philosophy. So there is very important and clear definition of them, which really doesn't accept soul, spirit, religion, God, and so forth. Although materialism is more common among the rich and also prosperous nations, it recognizes no boundary, and it can affect literally everybody from every walk of life. A word about capitalism I would like to just mention, and capitalistic theory of economics is perceived that individuals are basically they are innately self-interested people who use their intellect to maximize their own profits, their own benefits. So in other words, this is their goal, that they are innately interested in materialistic issues, and also they try through the education and intellect to maximize for the sake of benefit. Now, a few words about materialism and consumerism. This question comes up from time to time. Although these two are interrelated, they are not really the same thing. Consumerism is a social and economic order and ideology that encourages the acquisition of goods and service in ever increasing type of let's say that acquiring wealth and acquiring many goods and so forth. So they believe that consumerism in a way relies on consumption, and consumption itself is perceived as the machine, the engine which drives economic forward. It helps economic growth. Therefore, the more they have this desire and acquisition of product, they will be serving their nation for materialism, because The more they consume, the more there will be need to produce. The more it will be produced, the more will be a need to be consumed. And so this is what they encourage citizens for that. But basically, materialism is really a type of so-called order or issue of social ideology. And in this respect, it is different to some extent from materialism. I should say that not every consumerist is materialist. In fact, the majority of the consumerists are not materialists, but many of materialists, they are very passionately advocating and supporting the ideology of consumerism and having more and more products and so forth. At this time, I would like to share with you a story which is very insightful, and that is this: that this is a Yiddish story, and somebody one day persuade a rich man to go and visit and meet with a rabbi and to have some insight about his wealth and so forth. This is written by Charles Moore, and this is very interesting. And so this gentleman goes to the rabbi, and rabbi leads him to the window and asks this rich man, look out and see, what do you see from the window? The rich man says, well, all I see are people who are walking in the street, and that's all. And then the rabbi leads him to a mirror and said that, look at the mirror. What do you see in the mirror? He said, well, I see myself. And then a rabbi says that, look, in the window there is a glass, and in the mirror there is a glass. But the difference is that as soon as you come to a glass of mirror, which is covered by silver, you only see yourself. In other words, this is a self-absorption without meaning. This is what consumerism are, fascinated by object and goods, but less attention to meaning of that for them, for the society at large. And so this was very interesting. And a comment was that for that was that in the mirror, one craves a meaning which cannot find, but when looks out to the reality from the window, and then they find that there are more people to be concerned with. So with the materialistic ideology, in a way, we become more self-absorbed and self-interested individual. Now, a few words about the issue of Viktor Frankl's, what he talks about materialistic attachment and pleasure and meaning of life. As you know, Viktor Frankl was a scientist, a neurologist and psychiatrist, and he was a survivor of the concentration camp. After coming out of that, he wrote books. One of them is Man's Search for Meaning, very, very delightful. In that says that man's main concern is not to gain pleasure or to avoid pain, but rather to see a meaning in life. And that is quite different from the philosophy and ideology of Freud, which he very much feels that pleasure is the center and avoidance of pain is very much important. Also, I was reading a book by Eric Fromm, who was a very well-known American psychologist, he wrote a book entitled To Have or To Be. In that book, he identifies different kinds of characters or mode of existence in society. And he says that one mode of existence is having the mode of having or ownership. And the other one is the mode of being, or the character of being as a mode of existence. In the having mode, the relationship of individual with the world is a type of relationship of owning, of acquisition, of mastering, and so forth, more material. But in the being mode, it is existence which relates to the world, to the people, in a very authentic way, and also it embraces the true nature of human reality. So in a way, we can say that those who are very passionate about materialism and consumerism, we have to be a little bit more being type of character rather than owning more and more type of mode of operation. I would like to share with you a little bit about children and materialism and marketing, because this is very sensitive area that so many children are being affected. As you know, children are innately very perceptive and impressionable, and the way that they process information is quite different than the way that the adults process information, because still the sense of reasoning is not sufficiently developed in them, and therefore they are very vulnerable. So researchers who were working in the field of marketing and materialism and so forth, they decided to do a very interesting research, and they come up with this idea that with their finding that usually children below age 8, they are more vulnerable than the older children because they are more likely to be exploited than the older children. This is because of their inability to reason very effectively. So whatever they see in television, in video, whatever, they take them as face value and don't come up to question. So that what is the purpose of this and what is this about? So the advertisers, in a way, they developed a type of a strategy to expand and multiply maximum effect on young children by, in a way, producing certain program to attract younger children. The same group of researchers, they studied on children between age 12 and 14 with regard to how much money being spent for them and buying toys and different goods and so forth. And they found that the parents and family spend $500 billion per year in order to provide goods and material for the children. And that is because children ask for it. And they ask because they are influenced by social media, by television, by maybe family and friends and so forth. And it is interesting to note that many of these companies which provide this advertisement, they themselves spend each year some $12 billion American money in order to provide this, prepare and provide this advertisement and marketing. So it is quite a huge business that they try to get to the children and really change that sense of need be changed to the sense of want and desire through psychological type of changes in their mind, they are able to attract them more and more toward this kind of objects. Now, there is a very interesting and classic study done by an American, very well-known psychologist. Is called David Myers. And David Myers was very much interested to see within a period of time in the United States, when they gain more and more income, do they become happier, or do they have any problem? And this study was done and was published. According to this psychologist, the study expanded from 1957 to 1998, that is to say 40 years. And during this period of 40 years, the study, one of few of the questions were as follows. One of them was that, are you very happy? And really it was focused especially about happiness in relation to the level of income and other benefits. The answers which they got was astonishing. And they found that during that period, they were not happier than 40 years ago, 40 years earlier, but the family was terribly affected very adversely. That is to say that the number of divorce doubled. The amount of income was doubled. But also the teenage suicide was tripled. So triple suicide, double divorce in the face of double economy and very little happiness. So he came to this conclusion and said, we are twice as rich and no happier. Now, this negative relationship between wealth and well-being has been replicated, the same study, in other countries, and they found that this was true in their countries, such as countries involved were Australia, Germany, Norway, Romania, Russia, United Kingdom, and so forth. And they felt, but nevertheless, it is difficult to generalize it because there are some cultural elements involved and many other issues. Now, why this happened? One of the reasons is that money cannot buy happiness. The things that really matter is such as the sense of friendship, love, family, respect, and intimacy, and justice and compassion. These are not things that you could find in the stores to buy them or in any market. This is something innate, something psychological, spiritual, and that's very important. Another issue which I would like to share with you is the issue of escalation of expectation and desire. One of the reasons the money and income does not necessarily bring happiness, again, has been examined, and has been said that escalation and expectation plays a very much important role. Of course, greed also is a very important factor, but escalation of expectation is very much important in the problem of unhappiness and expecting that it should have been better. Well, there was a study done in Chicago Tribune among the workers of this company many years ago, and they went to a group of the population of the workers who were receiving $30,000 American dollars per year. And they asked them this question, very simple, straightforward question, saying that, are you happy with this salary? They said, no, really. And then they asked them, well, what salary you expect that would make you happy? They said that, $50,000 that would make us happy. And these researchers, they had another program for another group who did receive $50,000 as salary per year. And so they asked them, well, you are receiving $50,000 per year. How do you find it? Does it make you happier? Do you feel more satisfying life? They said, no, not at all. In fact, then they said that, well, what do you expect? They said that, well, really, $250,000 per year would answer our question, and otherwise we are not happy. So you see that as much as you take the level of income higher and higher, the initial goals are moved upward once the lower levels of expectations are achieved. So when we achieve a goal about well-being, about let's say that better income and so forth, we become very attached to that, and then we get bored and we move on to higher. Our desire pushes us, or our greed maybe pushes us to a higher level. Of course, part of it is understandable because for the expenses of life, for insurances, for medicine, for medication, and so forth, certain amount of money is needed and adjustment is necessary. But moving quite drastically upward, saying that we can be happy in that level itself can be a challenge to resolve. And in fact, this issue of escalation of income from time to time, almost each time, as though you get to the same people with different answers, we need more and we need more. So that in a way perpetuates a cycle of neediness, and they probably never are happy because each time they want more. And this is one of the symptoms of materialism and materialistic concepts. Now, a few words about contentment, which in Baha'i point of view and materialist point of view, they are quite different, but nevertheless, I would like to share with you some thoughts about contentment and the issue of greed. This is a very major problem, major issue in today's world, and because the culture of consumerism relies very much in gaining more and more satisfaction, and consumerism is really, this is part of their engine to move forward. And to be satisfied is not easy, and to be happy is not, and content is not easy at all. There is a Spanish proverb which is very beautiful and says that since we cannot get what we like, let's like what we get. In other words, let's be content with what we have and stop dreaming for more and more and asking for more and more. Now, this issue of contentment in the Baha'i point of view is very important. Baha'u'llah revealed a tablet in Arabic, which is called Madinatul Reza or Madinatul Rida, which means that city of radiant acquiescence. In this tablet, Baha'u'llah indicates that the prime requisite for those who wish to tread the path of contentment is the resignation to the will of God and to accept it radiantly and be content. And then he explains that in this world, contentment, full contentment is impossible, because it is impossible to live a life in this material world which there is no error, there is no sin. He says that even the smallest sin, which could be very, very mild, that itself, one, will be sufficient to indicate that contentment is not possible in this materialistic attachment to the world. So contentment is relative, and people who are content also, usually they are happier, because they are not longing for more and more money, condo, and cars, and so forth, much better and up to date, and so forth. Now, as you know, with regard to joy and life in the world, Abdu'l-Baha has beautiful quotes in which he says that all the sorrow and the grief that exist come from the world of matter. The spiritual world bestows only the joy. And this is very profound. I don't think that psychologists, sociologists, and behavior scientists really have been able to understand fully the meaning, the significance of happiness, perhaps the significance, but the true meaning of happiness. And later on, I come to the definition of the happiness in the Baha'i point of view. But I would like to start with other aspects of the happiness. And in an intensely materialistic world, or materialistic society, having happiness in the true sense of the word is very difficult, because happiness is more than a smiling face and laughter and so forth. True happiness has a quality of contentment, a sense of fulfillment, and spiritual enlightenment. And Abdu'l-Baha says that there are two types of happiness, spiritual happiness and material happiness. And with regard to material happiness, Abdu'l-Baha says that it doesn't exist. But spiritual happiness is the true basis of life and is very important in this world. In fact, many times I discuss with my students about difference between pleasure and happiness. Often they take it as though it is the same. Pleasure is a type of phenomenon which really is stemming from biological part of the human brain's reaction. A person could be very pleased with something and very enjoyable and to some extent happy, but very temporary. And yet a person with happiness, he has a deep feeling of not only satisfaction, but also sense of gratitude and contentment. There is very interesting research finding in recent years, which are astonishing to hear. Psychology never expected that this could happen one day. And that is the fact that from the University of Warwick in UK, there was a research which was published and then it went all over the world. And the finding was that the happiest countries of the world has the highest rate of suicidal people who commit suicide. Now, this is counterintuitive and, in fact, a paradox of higher suicide in happiness, because usually we have seen in clinical practice patients in a state of depression or at risk for suicide, and they may attempt suicide. But the point that we never heard about an environment which is very happy, instead of inspiring others for happiness, they become suicidal. Now, first of all, one has to question about what kind of happiness we are talking about here, perhaps material happiness. But they have done this research replicated in other countries, and they found that in several countries, people who were more satisfied with their lives, which means that also they were happy. And the prevalence of suicide among these countries or states of the United States is higher. As an example, I read in one of these journals that in the state of Utah, which is ranked first number one in the country for having a very satisfying and satisfied type of a life. And yet they were number 9 highest suicide rate. So in the 10 highest suicide rate in the country comes a country which yet the population of it say that they have a very simple, satisfied, and nice life. And then they studied in different states. What was interesting for me was to see in the state of New York, with regard to satisfaction, it was ranked number 45 toward the end among all the states. But with regard to suicide, they were the lowest. They had the lowest number of suicide among all the states, almost saying that is rare. Now, this is very interesting. One of the analogies that a professor, his name is Andrew Oswald from Warwick University, brought up, which makes some sense. He said that discontent people in a happy place may feel particularly harshly treated by life. Those dark contrasts may in turn increase the risk of suicide. So in a way, going to places where people are content, satisfied, and happier, don't be surprised that those who are suicidal or are predisposed to suicide may act out suicidal behavior. However, I would like to say a few words of caution that this should not be generalized because it's still to be seen. But in my mind, when I was reading and reflecting on that, I felt that first of all, what is their definition of being satisfied and happy? But one thing is true, that I have seen that patients who have been depressed and they were sent to some of the most delightful vacational areas that everybody would enjoy. And to our surprise, we noticed that these patients, after getting there a few days, they became more depressed. And some may be suicidal because they felt that the environment is so happy and jovial, and they cannot be like them. That was very deep satisfaction in it. And I don't think that I have much, but I would like briefly go to the issue of mental health and materialism. Among books and literature that I studied, there are very rare articles or books publishing about spirituality in books or articles talking about materialism. So there are new information emerging which show that there are certain symptoms more common among the materialistic population. And these are, for example, the sense of isolation, loneliness in the materialistic population itself can be a factor for depression. The Universal House of Justice, in one of its letters, states that it must be realized that the isolation and despair from which so many suffer are products of an environment ruled by an all-pervasive materialism. So obviously, in the world level, this is an observation that shows that the isolation and also hopelessness and homelessness can be a factor. But also some of the researchers found that at present time society, because people technologically are so advanced, the reduction of physical activities and exercise, and also the sedentary life and the rise of obesity, blood pressure, and so forth, itself, these are factors which may contribute to the depression. And modernity and depression is something that I have explored quite a bit. And in addition, that toxic social environment characterized by the increasing competitiveness, stress, and also inequality and social isolation and so forth. All of these contribute to the rise of depression in the society. So not always because of genetic and or serotonin or other enzyme of the brain are not deficient, therefore patient gets depressed. Some of these are because of the environment where we live. Now, this was studied in China. For example, Chinese population, the metropolitan Chinese population, they have gone through a lot of stress from the rural time of 1930s or 20s, and depression was not known very much among them. But this metropolitan Chinese, they found larger number of suicide among them. For example, they studied a group of Chinese from those who were born in 1966 as compared to those who were born in 1937. They found out that those who were more recent, although that was a long time ago, the more recently came to metropolitan China, the number of depression and suicide was higher than those who were prior to this new changes in the society of China. The opposite was the Amish society. And in the Amish culture, where there's a strong sense of community and combined with a coherent religious values and so on, depression and bipolar disorder is very low, almost 1%. Much lower than many other parts of the world. And also, of course, there are different other issues with regard to this mental health and materialism. This issue of loneliness and materialism, I already pointed out, but I would like to add one more thing which relates to materialism, because that occurs more in the affluent families and affluent population. And that is, the children grew up in this kind of family, which is very wealthy, and they're very busy, competition, constantly out to get more wealth and also to provide more with the families. The opportunity to have more time with the children to convey that sense of compassion, sense of friendship, and the sense of justice, and really raising them with a virtuous type of character very low. There was a professor, Oliver James, from United Kingdom, that he found this syndrome, although it is not very official. And that was about a case, a 16-year-old teenager who was too young to drive, but nevertheless, he decided to drive and also drink. And as a result, he ran over 4 people while he was drunken and driving. And 4 people were killed. And this was a catastrophe, and was in the news all over a few years ago. And then at the court, his psychologist and his lawyer and many others as witness for defense, they came with this idea saying that this teenager is the product of a family in which these virtues, this sense of relating to them and knowing their borders, their boundaries of the domination and so forth is not has been instructed in their upbringing, and therefore they should not give very harsh type of sentence to this teenager. That reminds me these words of Shoghi Effendi about materialism and its consequences. And he says that the crass materialism which lays excessive and ever-increasing emphasis on material well-being, forgetful of those things of the spirit on which alone a sure and a stable foundation and can be laid for human society, how important it is. If I have time, I could say a few words about two characteristics of the materialistic lifestyle, and these are a sense of empathy and sense of indifference. Materialistic people, they don't have that very kind, not all of them, but that friendly relationship and that sense of empathy toward those. And this sense of indifference, because they are so busy and competitive society and so forth, and other reasons, they are more individualistic. They have individualistic lifestyle. So empathy among them has been reported not very much strong. In fact, in the case which I introduced a few minutes ago, the sense of the lack of empathy led him to do that. And the same time after these 4 people killed, still he wasn't sure that he understood the meaning of it. With regard to this issue of empathy, there has been some very heartbreaking incidents in the society. For example, in 2012, in New York Times, there was an article published, and they reported that in China, a 2-year-old girl was run over by a van. And this was in a street, and the driver did not even stop and left the scene. Then, within the following 7 minutes, there were people, and those on the bicycle or walking came past by. None of them came to touch, to move this child who was seriously injured. Until a few minutes later, a second truck came and ran over the same child and left. And that was very tragic. A woman who was standing, she came forward and threw himself toward the child and pulled the child to the side until the mother came. Shortly after, in the hospital, the child was announced dead. See, here it is the observers who are watching all this, and not one of them come to rescue or to at least pull the child outside to a safer place. What is the meaning of that? Here I'm speaking very much often about materialism and material things, but it doesn't have to be material objects to make a person materialist. I think that it could be not only possession of the wealth of the goods, but also possession of position, of entitlement to some of those things, and a sense of egotism. That itself part of this mindset that it can be found in individuals who are considered as materialists in a way. And there is, and also having a sense that other people also have needs, and therefore that should be given consideration. Mahatma Gandhi wrote a statement which became almost eternal and very wonderful. It says that earth provides enough to satisfying every man's need, but not every man's greed. And that's very much true, that the amount of greed that we have, it is incredible sometimes in general. Now, global poverty, I would like to share with you some of the statistics from the United Nations or other international organizations, which really we should be aware of that, how huge number of people are suffering with very little material means. The poorest 40% of the world's population accounts for 5% of global income. So can you imagine 40% of world population, their income, it amounts to 5% of the global income. On the other hand, the richest 20% accounts for 3/4 of this. That means that at least 20%, they account for 75% of the wealth of the world population. According to UNICEF, each day, 26 to 30,000 children die, and the world is not aware of that. And they die in villages, towns, and with very little information around them, and they die very quietly, and that's very sad. And among other parts of the issue of the wealth and poverty, nearly 1 billion people in the world entered the 21st century unable to read a book or even sign their names. Again, it shows that the illiteracy, the problem of education, and where the money goes. Less than 1% of what the world spends every year on weapons would have been sufficient to put every child into a school by the year of 2000, and this never happened. Almost half of the world's population, that is to say nearly 3 billion people, live in less than $2 per day. Nearly half the population in developing countries suffer at any given time from health problems caused by a lack of safe water and adequate satisfaction for education. Now, poor people worldwide pay a heavy price about the infectious disease. 40 million people of the world suffering from HIV and AIDS, and again, they don't have sufficient substance or ability to take care of themselves. Now, I would like to share with you here the statistics of the wealth, how it's spent in the Western or industrialized rich countries, and what amounts are being spent for very vital issues such as basic social services and needs. Before finishing material wealth, again, some other dilemma that we see around the world, one of them is the issue of human trafficking and forced labor. Over 12 million people around the world are trapped for forced labor at an estimated cost of about $20 billion for administration and activities to keep them. But the amount of money that they get from this, the annual income of these activities is approximately $42 billion, trapping these people and making use of them like a slave and getting money from them. Another one is that according to the United States, 4 million people a year are traded against their will to work in a form of servitude, which really is slavery in a way. And the majority of them come from Asia, some from Europe and Latin America. But another thing which is very, very important, according to the Coalition of Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, this organization found that every 10 minutes, a woman or a child is trafficked into the United States for forced labor. I don't know if it's still continuing or not. This was in a few years. And this practice is illegal and unethical exploitation of human beings. Now we come to the conclusion. Just to bring a Baha'i perspective here on the issue, Abdu'l-Missagh states that although material civilization is one of the means for the progress of the world of mankind, yet until it becomes combined with divine civilization, the desired result, which is the felicity of mankind, will not be attained. And in a statement from the Universal House of Justice, it is stated that the teachings of the Baha'i faith in the course of this dispensation, here it is a special reference to the institution of the right of God. It contributes to the spiritualization of humanity through the promotion of a new attitude to the acquisition and use of material resources. So it is the attitude, this is the mindset which needs to be changed in order to change the world. And that is a spiritual force which can change and not material. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghadirian. I hear some feedback, I'm afraid, but I'll have to see if I can avoid that. We will have some questions, I'm sure. I already see one person has asked, will you make your paper available to other people?
I would love to. These are based on notes, but all of these, much more in detail, are in my books. Yeah, this is the second edition, Materialism. So it would be easier for you to go through that. In fact, in the book, there are much more stories and statistics and analysis about various issues, which really, most of what I said was from the book.
Very good. I have also a question whether you have any examples from the Baha'i community about materialism that you could share with us.
Well, this is very delicate and very interesting question. The materialism is so low key that I can say with certainty that Baha'is very devoted, wonderful, and yet you hardly see them in the gathering and meeting. Well, this could be because of some other reasons. But generally speaking, their attachment is in such a way that I wonder that if materialism has not affected. Certainly, materialism does affect Baha'is, not because we are Baha'is, but we are not Baha'is who have been deep in the principles. Really, when we read the writings of Abdu'l-Baha, he was very concerned in his trips to the West. So many times he brought up this issue of materialism. And in fact, prior to his passing, he especially and frequently, he expressed his concern about mental tests. And I went through literature to find the trace of materialism perhaps, but really the issue was different. There is a memorandum from the Department of Research dated 1995 about materialism, about this, about mental tests. I found some words which were related, such as it will be intellectual, it will be psychological, it will be related very much to the covenant, but I couldn't find materialism. Maybe it was not meant to be for that purpose, because he was warning that it will be serious. In fact, he, at one point, I don't know if it's Guardian or Abdu'l-Baha, he refers to it as a storm. And because beloved Guardian also made comments about it. So this is something that you have to expect.
Mm-hmm. One here, Stephen, up in, I think he's up in Yellowknife, if I remember right, up the midnight sun, asks whether there are things in the Baha'i community that might mitigate the problems, such as devotions, service, sacrifice, huququllah, these kinds of aspects of the faith.
Well, the more we are attached to the writings, whether it is devotion or a study circle or other means, if we don't have that awareness and we are not active in the community, we are more at risk to outside activities, business, which is okay, business, work, and so forth. But when you don't see them in the Baha'i activities, not participating, for example, in the institute process, we are really in a different type of world because we are bombarded by media, by television, by videos, by news constantly. And in front of us, materialism is waiting, is looking at us. And they're very charming, very attractive, very seductive. And many of us probably we are already influenced and affected. So I think that we should really go to the writings and the warnings, exhortation of Abdu'l-Missagh and the Guardian is very, very strong. In fact, the word is devouring flame, which is Guardian cited. He cited from Baha'u'llah. This was the word of Baha'u'llah, the devouring flame of materialism. And Ruya Khanum stated that the Guardian rarely would use very strong words unless he had to. And this is one of them.
Nabil asked, could this be an example of the Baha'is struggling to survive in the materialistic world? And I think you may have answered that question already.
Certainly, this is a struggle, that's right. Of course, we go through our own tests and trials, and which is necessary for our personal growth. But sometimes we know that we are so much involved in our business and our activities, we pick up all these side effects and problems and complications, and we just don't have time to come back and to the reality.
Alex asked a very interesting question. How can one effectively differentiate between being content with what one has and the desire to grow in order to not stagnate or become complacent?
Well, this is very subjective issue that maybe I will be content with 2 dates or 2 sandwich per day, but another person may not be satisfied with a Cadillac and having lunch in a big exotic hotel. So I guess that we have to be our judge. And that is what in the right of God, that it is left to the individual. And so beautiful to see that when you do that offer of payment of Allah, that there should be joy and delight and willingness. If it is not, it will not be accepted. So that shows the expectation and the level of maturity of this new race of man.
Kitty asks, what are the major additions to the new edition of your book? What's the difference between the second and first editions to the book?
I updated some of the issues which were more prevalent today. I updated quite a bit. And also analysis was changed. And because I know that some of my non-Baha'i friends and the library, they use it. For example, my library of the hospital, they put it right on the table. And my colleagues and everybody knows that I am Baha'i and they are interested. So I think that, I added quite a bit.
Great. Don asked this question, how do we address the issue of materialism in a convincing way in a secular society, even when some people agree with you intellectually and recognize that we need to consume less to save the planet, but do not relate this need to consume less to spirituality?
Well, in the secular society, for them, materialism or let's say that consumerism, all of this, just a normal way of life. But I think that what is vital is the philosophy of materialism, which is the issue of the spiritual component of human realities, especially the soul, the religion, and the inner spiritual values. They don't believe in that, and because they feel that these are byproducts of the brain, and it is not. So that is very clear.
Let me see if there are any questions. I don't see any more right now. And I had asked my question already, so perhaps we can wait a second and see if anyone else gives us some more questions. This is really, I think, an extremely important topic, as I mentioned to you earlier. The Baha'i community is not really aware of I think most people are not aware of the extent to which they're immersed in material, they think, needs, when in fact their material needs are perhaps a lot more modest than they're used to thinking. And so this gets into the issue of consumerism, as I mentioned to you before. And obviously, I think consumerism is one sort of aspect of all this subject of materialism. Do you have any particular comments about consumerism as it relates?
No, it is differentiating consumerism from materialism is very difficult, because materialism is more individualistic, the person. But here, this is a huge umbrella of the consumption and consumerism, and people feel very comfortable, and some of them could be very, very spiritual people, and majority. In fact, the majority of population of the world is consumers, and we are a part of them. But I think that, again, going back to materialism, in one of the writings, it is referred to as a type of phenomenon which has effects such as paralysis. And the person is so sucked in, so driven in, that has no energy, no interest to do something beyond that. Even the writing, even the prayer maybe. And that is far gone.
Well, I don't see any other questions right offhand. And perhaps we can now, oh, here comes one. Lion asks this question: can you speak to the relationship between the concept of separation of church and state and how that influences the development of subconscious beliefs about the relationship between material and spiritual life?
Really, this is not my field about the separation of state and faith. And I am not sure if there is any study done about materialism in this kind of situation.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. Sandy asks, and people are now turning in there, sending their questions. Sandy asks, can you suggest a way to educate the Baha'is that are immersed in a materialistic attitude without creating any disunity?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think that being aware that materialism is an enemy. It is a force which is really captivating people. And therefore we should be familiar with the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Missagh. Often we take it, well, materialism is for the rich people. I'm not rich, I'm not wealthy, so, I am okay. But I think that this lack of awareness could be adversely affecting them spiritually.
Yeah. That seems to be the end of the questions here. So perhaps I will now thank you and turn to some information about upcoming talks. We're very, very appreciative, Dr. Ghadirian, of this presentation on materialism. I think it's very important for the Baha'is to think about the subject. So thank you again for providing us this insight into this phenomenon in the world that's seriously affecting the whole world, including the Baha'is.